Hello, everyone. This is Janet Nelson of the Creative Mind Podcast, and this is my guest, Cindy. I've never learned how to say your last name,
It's Bourgeois.
Bourgeois.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. So today, Cindy helped me so much with Matthias. She can articulate how people that think like he work, and it would just made a huge difference. And I can't say thank you enough, Cindy, because it made it so much easier. And it took him from a place of being scared to figure out his own mind to being able to go, oh, I need a break. Oh, I can do this. And so thank you for that. So today I'm super excited to have her, and you're going to really enjoy what she has to say. And one of the things that we're going to be doing, the second part of this, is talking about how to teach people like Matthias and Cindy. So, Cindy, tell us your story, starting with school, of how it, how did you survive? How was it for you?
School was interesting. I went to a lot of different schools, so it was a matter of life changing always. In my very early years, I spent a lot of time with my brother because we were in the same class for quite a while. So we had a little sibling rivalry going on at school here and there. But I got along well with the teachers, and most of the time the teachers would take their time with me, uh, trying to figure out where I came up with the answers that I came up with. That was usually the big one. But I learned how to do what the teacher wanted me to do through the early years of school, which for a person the way we think is not an easy thing to do because you get in trouble when you don't know you're in trouble and you said something wrong, that kind of thing. So learning, I did well. I got good grades. I did what I was supposed to do until I got up around fourth, fifth grade. And that's when they started throwing things at me that I couldn't, I, I had to learn differently than other people. And while we were talking earlier, I got to thinking my friends did not understand why I had so much trouble with math. They didn't understand it. Even though they helped me, they got the flashcards, they put me through, I mean, round after round after round until I had everything memorized that I needed to know to pass the fifth grade, sixth grade, something like that. But they didn't understand why. My brain would not process what 6 plus 6 was on a consistent basis. So, and that's where I found my challenges. Really, I remember the most. That was one of my biggest challenges. I loved reading. I liked those little reading stories they had where you had to go answer questions. I could usually go through those pretty fast. Every once I'd get a story where I could had trouble comprehending the story, but it was like an open book test. I could always go back and look. So as long as I could go back and look, I was gold. But that school was challenging. Teachers always liked me. They called me the teacher's pet because the teacher would spend extra time with me trying to help me get through what I needed to get through. And it wasn't because they were being extra special nice. It was because I needed the help. And my parents didn't know what to do. So, but I was the unusual one in the family.
We understand that. Yeah, but there's a lot of challenge in there that I relate to. Having gone through school after school after school, and I'm sequential, and you end up missing, for me, the multiplication. I mean, fifth grade, they already went through multiplication and I didn't. So I end up in this sixth grade class and everybody's already had it. And this is the first time I've ever run into it. you know, um, those kind of things that happen when you change schools. But for a non-sequential person, things that are repetition really help.
A
Keeping
lot.
the process helps. Um, Even a day to day, having the habits. I know what I'm going to do now. I know what I'm going to do next. I know oh, and this is going to be changing here. Okay, I know that it's going to happen. I can deal with that. But those processes are really important to help them work with life.
Consistency helps a lot.
Consistency. Yeah.
Hmm.
So that came up. Math for a lot of the people I've been talking to has always been an issue. Always been an issue. I've done the flashcards. Um, Made sure he was able to do those things. The interesting part to me was when it became more concept based. The more concept based it became, the more he did not retain it.
More concept. What do you mean?
Concept, idea based, you know. Um,
Like algebra, x
yeah, like
equals
algebra.
one type thing.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
But you know,
imag it becomes a challenge because from the very beginning you're thinking, what the heck is x?
mhm,
And then they say, well, that's what you have to find is the value of x, which means you get the step by step by step by step to get to that value of x. Step by step doesn't work so well. So, and that's algebra. Like I was saying, me and algebra, we never got along. And the
uh,
teacher, my teacher said, you know, you can do this. You do everything right. You do, the process is perfect, but in the very end, you have the wrong answer. Why is that?
mhm,
I don't
yeah,
know. I don't know. But
mhm,
yeah, math is a huge challenge because it doesn't stick. I
yeah.
guess that's the word. It doesn't stick. A girlfriend of mine that thinks somewhat like I do, she said it's an unimportant thing. Anything that's unimportant, I don't worry about it. I'm like, well, this is important. I need to remember this.
Oh, it frustrates Matthias to no end that he can finish a course in algebra or whatever, right? And he can get a B
Hmm.
and can't retain it. He
Hmm.
cannot retain
Yes,
it.
I do the same
Um,
thing.
yeah, I, I've told a couple people now that if you really want to teach people like you geometry process, you want to teach them the basic concepts, those like basic ideas. Do perspective about drawing. Don't do the numbers, just do the perspective
Hmm.
drawing. And
Yes,
they'll see, the lines and they'll see all the things and how it fits together. And they'll have a visual understanding of the concepts you're trying to teach.
but we won't remember it.
But you can redo it,
Yes, yes,
and that's the point.
repetitive. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
repetition. Like I said earlier, repetition is the best teacher.
Well,
Learning.
always, always. Um, but like I said, Matthias took a whole class and he aced it. There was adults in there, and he's the one who aced it. Um, and if I ask him to go back, he has a book right there that he could redo it. The basics are already there for him.
Right.
As a person that is sequential, most of us don't retain all the pieces. I'm sorry, unless you're a mathematician and your mind thinks that way. None of us remember all that stuff. But if we went back and had to look at it, we're going, oh, I remember enough that I probably could figure it out. And that's where Matthias is. He remembers enough that with the book, seeing it, he could do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that same thing. So that's a normal way of remembering. And that's not a bad thing. It's just he will not retain at all how to do it with numbers to do the circle thing,
Yeah.
or get a corner
Yeah.
with the numbers. Are you kidding me? He knows he's got it. He know he had it one time. Has no idea. how to rethink
Mhm.
how to do it again.
I'm there. I'm with him.
Yeah,
I'm in that same boat with a lot of things
yeah.
that have been thrown at me. Matter of fact, things that when I was working, some of the things that I created, I had to remember how I created them in order to change them. And
Hmm.
I couldn't, I had to take them apart to remember how I created them.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
it's not
yeah.
because we're unable.
Good. Well, I had to do that with math, when I was helping him. I had to take it back down to do the same thing, break it apart,
Right.
break it apart. Okay. Oh, okay, I remember how to do this because, okay, this, but I had to break it apart before I could put it back together. It didn't cut, it
Exactly.
was just there. So again, a lot of us have to do the same thing. It's not like it's, oh, I remember exactly how to do history when I'm 60 years old. I mean, or algebra, I'm
No.
sorry. I know how to do algebra because I did it then, and I'm 60 years old. I still remember. Only mathematicians that think that way are going to remember that. Or, people
Yeah.
with, uh, photographic memories.
Or
But most of us
analytical minds,
aren't.
you know.
So, but you hear what we're doing. We're saying what is normal and what's not in our memories.
Hmm.
And if you can take it apart and put it back together, you remember everything you're supposed to remember.
Maybe.
Yeah. Um, but we're not going to be perfect at it. There's some things we're never going
No.
to figure out how do we did it.
No.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Um, yeah, thankfully I don't have to do high school again.
Thank God for small favors.
ah, yeah. Um, but it's interesting to me to see how the memory works. Yeah. But the hardest part was when Matthias was doing everything the teachers were asking him to do, and most of it was in word form. And like you said, he could get the grade, right? But then at the end of the quarter, when they took the last test and they were supposed to remember everything from the quarter, nope, it wasn't going in the long-term memory at all.
No.
Um, and they finally figured out that he has to have his pictures. He has to be able to think things through with pictures, and the pictures are where he remembers them. That's that's the icon to touch to remember anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I ended up finally, especially in high school, uh, I figured out that if I could get my test back from the teacher at the end of the quarter, I could go back through those tests and find it in the book to study for my quarterly final. And nine chances out of 10, a lot of those questions would be on the quarterly final. Problem was, I couldn't always get the test back. So I would end up having to go back and go through the books because I just didn't retain it, and where do you go back and find what date somebody did something when your brain just doesn't want to? That's not something significant to your brain. It just doesn't want to keep that date, you know?
And my brain immediately goes, how does the teacher think? And what are they going to ask?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that doesn't so much go through my brain. It's not how does the teacher think? It's like, am I going to answer this question right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because the teacher will ask me a question and I'll come back with an answer and she'll say, that's not exactly what I was looking for. What about this? And that would give me a direction. That would give me context. And I would be able to go back into the story and say, okay. And sometimes I would even get sent back to read it again. And then I could come back and say, okay, this is what you're looking for. And I would be able to give the answer. But the answer I gave, there was nothing wrong with it. It just wasn't what she was looking for.
Hmm. Yeah, they don't. Matthias does not think like other people. Mm-mm.
No,
And I'm good with that. I salute him. He's amazing. And so, um, one of the things I brought up earlier was uh, in the Native American community, they had a symposium for the teachers in the Clearwater Valley. And they sent the teachers out to a stream nearby to pick up a rock and then do a stream of thought and just write down what they thought about the rock. You know, what size was it? It felt hard, um, rough, whatever it was. And then, um, what do you think when you think of a rock? You know, like Jesus is the rock of my salvation. You know, anything that they were thinking about, just stream of thought. You know, it reminds me of when I skipped rocks as a
Mm-hmm.
child. You know, just stream of thought. And then they shared it with each other. So I took that thought and I took it to history. And we had done some videos on all the presidents of, I think it was 70s to the 90s. And so I said, just give me a stream of thought. What are you thinking? I didn't give him a direction. I just, what are you thinking about all these? And his comeback was they they were just all men, just doing the very best they can.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, a 17-year boy figuring out that was incredible. That's because he's going to be a man someday, and he's just going to have to be able to do the best he can and be okay with that. It's great learning, but it was a big picture.
You know, I was watching the news today and how everybody's picking on our new president and all that. And it got me to thinking about exactly the same thing. All the presidents throughout history, what were they doing? The very best they could. I, I was like, you can only do your best. And that's, you can keep trying to make it better, but they were all doing the best they can. I just thought of that. I was thinking of that earlier today.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, so the teachers were great, but I remember you were talking about one particular teacher in high school that really blessed you because she took the time to help you figure yourself out. How important was that?
Oh, that's always important when you get somebody that can help you with that. I have, when somebody takes the time to know you for you, not you for every other kid out there that thinks pretty much the same way. We all think differently. None of us are all the same. But for a teacher to take the time and say, okay, let's try this. Or if you can stay after today, let's see if we can do this. That's huge because that means that they're taking how you feel, how you're learning, and what's going on in your world into consideration to help you along your path. And for me, it was like I made a friend because this friend was helping me when I couldn't get help from anybody else and more than willing to help. Let's put it that way. So, getting someone to listen is huge to start with because when you got 50 kids in a room, I mean, come on. We had big, we had 36 kids in just my math class. So having someone to take the time. Matter of fact, at one point, I was going to this English class. One thing that goes with my way of thinking is that learning, I love to learn. You can throw something at me and say, what do you know about this? And if I don't know, I am going to figure it out. And even if it means picking your brain, well, um, the willingness to learn always sends us into let's go see what we can figure out about it. And usually teachers they're not willing to wait for you to get to that point where you have learned enough that you are able to function with that knowledge. They want instant learning. They want you to know now. And I'm sorry, we don't do that. I don't. And this teacher taught me and said something to me many, many, many moons ago. She said, repetition is the best teacher. If you don't know it, keep looking and keep repeating over and over and over again. You'll get it. And would ask my opinion. She would ask me things clean out of the blue, and I'd be stuck. I don't know what you're talking about. And then she would take the time to back up and explain what she was after. Because I've always considered myself to have no imagination. And the reason I say that is because if you throw something at me and say, there's a dog over in the corner, tell me what you think of that. Give me something original about that that you would do. And I'm going to say, there's a dog in the corner because my brain doesn't think in creativity unless you give me a direction. And so she would say stuff like, well, how about a happy dog? And that dog, I could come up with something. I could come up with a very happy dog doing very happy things, you know. But she was willing to do that. And because of that, I knew at a young age that my thinking was different. So I had to do things differently. But in high school, I went to this English class. Do you know what this English class consisted of? Going in, sitting down, teacher taking roll, and everybody doing whatever they wanted through the whole class. Okay? The first test came around and everybody got an A. And I'm like, what the heck am I doing in this class? So I quit going to class for 2 days. And then I went to the counselor's office because ethical me, I couldn't keep doing that. And I told the counselor, I'm not going back to that English class. I want you to put me into a different class. And he goes, well, where have you been for the last 2 days? I said, ask the teacher. He's been taking rolls. My name showed us there. And he said, yes. And I said, well, I wasn't there. I said, now, can you please put me in a different class? Because I'm not going back to that English class. I'm not learning anything. I'm just sitting there. And he said, okay. And he put me into a wonderful class that I could grab a hold of. And it was a study on Edgar Allan Poe. And I've never forgotten that class. And the teacher was very, very patient. And he even taught outside one day. He took us all out on the senior quad and we sat down and had class there one day. And it was one of the most interesting literature classes I have ever had. And it was because of the teacher taking the time for everybody to understand, even when the whole class is going, oh, because you asked the same question for the third time. He patiently answered that question. Been there, done that.
Matthias loves poetry and he writes poetry. He loves the feel of it and he
That's
gets
what
it.
poetry is. That's what poetry is. It's feeling. And Edgar Allan Poe's stories are heartfelt. They're very heartfelt. So understanding his story behind the books was, I found that fascinating because I understood the reason for the book. And that's where, with me, the context comes in. Okay, excuse me, the book is good, the book is interesting, but why? And he took us to the why. So, yeah,
Matthias learned to get to know the authors.
yes,
And I think he really enjoyed that.
I do that
Um,
now too.
yeah. Um, and then he lost it for a little while, but I think he's going to go back to it because he's such a learner. He just is. He absorbs that kind of stuff. So you were talking about how to make bread. You've been learning to make bread. Tell me that story.
I have. Well, I figured out that bread makes me sick. I can't eat store-bought bread. And when I found out what was in store-bought bread, I decided I was going to start making my own bread. Well, making bread is a step-by-step method. And step-by-step learning is not an easy thing to retain. I may retain step one, step two, and then later remember there's a step three, step four over here that I forgot, unless I have it all written down. And even then, I'm like, why do I have to go one, two, three, four? So what I did was I printed a bunch of recipes up, and then I sat down on YouTube and I started watching videos. And I must have watched over and over again, over 100 videos on how to make bread by, I don't know, 40, 50 different people, all on how they make their bread. By doing that, not only did I learn what bread is, what wheat is, how wheat flour and all that is made, I learned how it interacts with everything because each cook has a different way of putting things. So I got a whole lot of context out of repeating these videos over and over again. My husband even came in and said, "Are you watching? Are you watching those again?" Yes. So my first loaf of bread that came out was good. It wasn't bad. It was regular yeast bread, but now I'm learning how to do sourdough. So I'm in the process of watching my 100 and some odd videos of sourdough, how to make starter, to make sure it's right, how to cook it, so many things that you can do with it. And uh, I I was so overwhelmed. I was scared to death to even try my first loaf of bread the first time because I didn't think I could do it right. And after watching my 100 videos and having all my recipes, I came up with one recipe that worked for me. And I sat down and I made my first loaf of bread and it came out good. So now
Yeah.
I'm making hamburger buns and hot dog buns and dinner rolls and that kind of thing when I want to bake. And yeah, and I have my own chocolate chip recipe cookie too, cookie recipe, I should say too. So yes, all the video watching and all that is my way of I get to see what they're doing. I don't get to ask questions. I find that difficult because I can't stop them and say, "Why are you doing that?" But or "Why are you using that?" But by mixing up the videos by a whole bunch of different people, I actually see the differences. But the repetition, that's how I learned the step by step. Is the repetition. There's a reason for every step.
One of the hardest things teachers have to get their brains around is if they go slower, the step by step, think like I do about this, it never works.
Mm-mm. No, what got me with the step by step, what finally got to me, I guess, with the step by step is there is a reason for this step. There is a reason for this step. This step has to be done before you can go to this step. And when I got all that finally started sinking in as to this step has to be done before this step because this will happen if you don't. You know, when I started getting to that point, the step by step instruction actually made sense. So that's when the recipes started making more sense.
Yeah.
But the normal step by step of you got to do 1 + 1 = 2 all the time because that's the way it works never sunk with me because I could skip it. You know, you can skip steps in anything. So unneeded steps, why?
Yeah. I get it. Oh, I do. I do. The interesting part for me was when Matthias can actually, in science, see all the steps in his brain and get the right answer. And there was like 9 steps. You did what?
Yeah,
You did
because
what?
he's
I
looking
can't
at a
do that.
picture.
Right? Let me write it down. Then I can see it. But you, it,
It depends on the repetition for me and how well of a picture I've got in my brain. I had to go through a physiological examination one time. It's for brain function and memory function. And I had to go through one of those one time. My husband thought I had Alzheimer's. So I said, fine, we're both doing it. So we went to a neurologist and I said, would you please? And he said, sure. Oh, I had no idea what I was getting into. Well, when we ended up at this physiopsychologist's office taking these tests, I had to answer questions according to what he was telling me. I had to go back and repeat what he was saying. Well, to do that, I had to close my eyes so that I could see the colors he was talking about. And then I could repeat them back to him. And I could see the numbers that he was saying. And then I could repeat them back to him. Or I could picture the objects that he was describing. And then I could repeat them back to him. And I never thought of that until just now. I was seeing them before I could repeat them back to him.
The interesting part is you didn't put that together, that was the way you worked.
Yeah.
And that's what I found with a couple of my ladies. I'm going, do you put it into visual form?
Mm-hmm.
You forgot that. Okay, what can you use to put it in visual form that'll help you remember? And when they did that, it's like, oh, oh, and then they remembered and did whatever they needed to do.
It helps. It helps.
but
It's like the
but they
steps.
but that is a sequential step in itself, is knowing how your brain works and what you need to use. How do I do memory? Put it in visual form. You have to put those pieces together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I find it just now clicked. I was doing it literally without realizing it.
Yep, exactly. So, um, one of the things the brain changes as it grows.
Right.
Working with Matthias, at sixth grade, he would have had to have drawn or written something out, something
Mm-hmm.
physically to remember it. Along the way, by ninth grade, he's realizing, drawing takes a lot of time. I just don't have time to do that. So he took the time in his head to do the same kind of thing that he was doing with his hand.
Okay.
So he was purposely creating a picture. So basically, they have a scroll running through their head all the time.
Yeah.
And they kind of take that for granted. Okay, so do you think in pictures? Well, oh, I do. you know, your kind
Well,
of reaction sometimes.
but a lot of people don't think about it as thinking in pictures
Mhm.
because, yes, I see pictures, but I don't think of pictures, but I see pictures. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it does. And that's exactly it. But so they have to either take a picture out of the scroll to actually focus on, or they have to create another picture to, for memory or to
Yes.
understand what they're hearing.
Yes. Yeah. When you're being told a story, the story isn't being coming across as words. The story is coming across as pictures. And most of the time, the story is coming across as pictures from your memory, not pictures from, looking around you. It's pictures from what you remember seeing. And that's how stories come to life in my head when
So it's
someone's
kind of a
telling,
scene.
yeah. And the scene changes as the story changes. And reading, I am a slow reader. I always have been. And when I read, the pictures have to be there or the story doesn't make sense.
Mhm. Yeah. Do you read every word?
Yeah, I
Okay.
do. I do. I don't like to. I try to read fast. And I always wanted to be one of those big speed readers. I'm not a speed reader. I read every word.
Well, each person's different. Sherry said that she can't read slow. She ends up missing all those does ands and all those kind of things. They just don't.
Hmm.
She just can't do it. So she's a speed reader whether she wants to be or not. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
yeah.
So, um, but then she comes at the other end and she can tell part of the story. She doesn't think she gets it all, but she can tell part of the story. But she sees the big part and she has the big picture of it. And she's really enjoyed reading the book. Um,
Does she read the book again?
you can, but like I said, it's all in visuals and going on through her head.
I can read the same book 20 times and enjoy it every time.
Well, why not? You can do that with movies, can't we?
I get something different out of it every time I read it.
Exactly, just like a movie.
Hmm.
I mean, you're
Yeah,
playing a movie in your mind. Why not?
it is a
Um,
movie.
it is a movie. So, yeah, no problem. It's just don't ask you to sit down and write the whole thing about the movie.
That's right.
Uh, so, um, the other thing I wanted to bring out that really helped me understand is your story about being in FASA and down with New Orleans
Oh, and FEMA?
in FEMA. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And be done. Okay.
Remember, you had to put together, you had a team and you had all this
Oh,
information
yeah.
coming at
We
you.
had, there were, at that point, they had, I was a deputy human resources person, admin person, basically human resources. And my job was to oversee hiring and payroll and a lot that has to do with human resources. I don't know how familiar everybody is with that. We had at that point they had already brought in background security checks, people to do that, and they had a whole nother office where people had to go to get all that done, and they had already hired about 500 people, and we already had FEMA had somewhere around 1,600 people running around all over Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Well, my primary job was taking care of Louisiana. And when I got there, uh, payroll was a mess. It wasn't being done. People weren't getting paid that were hired newly. People, timesheets weren't getting turned in. So I had to sit down and figure out how to make it work. So after going through and thinking, and I was so overwhelmed with everything because I had a poor lady that was sitting over in a corner with just the blackest eyes from no sleep, trying to get her payroll done. And we had a staff of 8 people there sitting there with nothing to do because nobody was delegating. So I decided to take a walk. And I got up and I walked outside and I walked around and I thought seriously about how in the world can I make this work? So I came up with an idea and I put my idea into place. And I promised this lady with the very black eyes that she was going to go to her hotel room that night and get some rest. And tomorrow morning, things would change. And hopefully, in 2 weeks, she would be able to go home. So she had been there since the office had been established. And typically at that point during the history of FEMA, reservists didn't spend a whole lot of time at disasters. We would be in and out. We would get to go home for a little while and then come back or go to a different disaster. It just depended. But she had been there now at that point for over a month and she was exhausted. So we started the next day and I started delegating. And I delegated pretty big on her, and I told her that the responsibility of getting what needs to be gotten is not yours. The responsibility lies upon the supervisors and upon these 8 people sitting here. Your job is to oversee it. So we implemented it, we put it into place, and within the next pay period, everybody was getting paid but one person. And we had a slight glitch with that person. Don't know what happened. I don't remember. But it took me 3 hours of walking around and thinking about what needed to be done. How could we make this easier? And we had to account for everybody there. And we came up with a way to account with everybody there and made sure that we got every timesheet from every person that we had to pay. And then making sure everybody had lodging. somewhere to stay, unusual lodging. Sometimes, like I was staying with a friend, they gave me a room and a bathroom, and I was staying with them while I was there. And I ended up getting that young lady the following pay period, she got to go home. And she was so happy because she was just so exhausted. But taking the time to figure it out, my brain was like, there has got to be an easier way to do this. And I had to think of the whole process, how it starts to how it finishes in that office, and what needed to be done, and how I could delegate this work out to the right people to do it. And it worked. It was a mess, but it worked.
I love that story. What you told me that helped me with Matthias is when tons of material comes in, it feels overwhelming.
Take a break.
Take a break, which is what
Mhm.
that walking did. And you thought about some other things, you prayed about it. Well,
Yeah,
I basically think of it as a log jam falling on the brain, you know,
yeah,
and you just want to step back, let the log jam finish falling, and then it'll come up as a full made cabin. And
yeah,
then you can take it apart and go, okay, this is how this cabin worked. It came together.
yeah. It sometimes a person that thinks the way Matthias and I both do, when you get slammed with so much information at one time, you have to stop and you have to walk away and you have to give yourself a chance to let like you said, let everything settle down. You have to be able to figure out what's the priority and then fix that priority and then take a break. What's the next priority? And then fix that priority. Take a break. When they told me they wanted me to be the lead for the admin, I said no, because the lead also involved taking care of, uh, at that point, they were helping with the lodging, they were helping logistics with the lodging. They had to go to meetings all day. I didn't have time to go to meetings all day, and I knew that. So I said, no, let me get this section running. Let me get all of this settled down, and then we'll talk about it. Well, by then, I was exhausted. So everything was running smoothly. I went home. So, yeah, that break is important.
It's very, very important. The hard part, the teachers knew that Matthias could take a break, and they told him that. The problem is, with everybody I've talked to, nobody else in the room is taking breaks like that.
Nope,
So it's like
nope.
they don't understand how important it is to themselves, so they don't take them, even when they need them.
Hmm.
You almost have to be aware of, could you go take a break?
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
have to be proactive for them because they can't be for themselves. They're very sensitive to the people around them.
Well, and they're afraid that they're not living up to what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
And that's not the problem. That's not the problem at all. And trying to convince them of that is not an easy thing to do. When you're sitting in a classroom and everybody around you is working hard and you need to step back, what do? You can't just get up and walk out of the room, but you need to step back. What I used to do was I would sit, and this sounds really silly, but it worked for me. I would sit and I would think of the most mind numbing thing that would come into my brain. I mean, mind numbing. Something so inconsequential that not important at all, but it got my mind off of what I was doing. And I would do that for like 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Even if it was in a time test, sometimes I would have to do that. And then I would go back and I would look at it, and now I'm looking at it with fresh eyes. and it makes sense and I can do something. So in a classroom setting, that's how I got away with it. Sometimes I paid the price for it, sometimes I didn't. It just depended on the situation.
Yeah. The brain needs more time, and that's an ongoing issue in a classroom situation.
It is, with so much stuff being thrown at you. And the teachers don't do it on purpose. They really don't. And I know that. And I knew that then. They're doing their job. But when you have so much stuff being thrown at you and you're expected as a non-responder you're expected to respond now. If you don't have that answer in your mind right now, you're going to freeze.
Yep.
You're going to sound like an idiot in front of the whole class.
That shuts you up even more. Like,
Yes.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
round robin. Oh, I get it. I get it. Okay, we're going to turn the corner now,
Okay.
and we're going to talk about how to teach um, people like you and Matthias.
Okay.
It's one of the things that came up on one of the podcasts. One of the comments was, "But how do you teach them?" And it's a huge one um, because they have such a hunger. I mean, Matthias loves to learn. He really does.
We all
Um,
do.
yeah, and he's very intelligent. It just is a different way than these sequential people. He learns very well and very creative. Um, and if you what I'm finding over and over again, if you put him with people like people that are sensory.
Uh-huh.
Okay. We haven't talked about that a lot on this show, and we will in the coming things, because what does it mean to be sensory? To take in as much information as they take in all the time.
Right.
Um, but they have a natural people like them, they respond well. I mean, they listen to other
Mhm.
people, and the other people feel like they've been listened to and understood. And so this is the great PR people, they just are.
Yeah,
So,
they are.
mhm. Yeah,
That's
and
how
we
I
need
ended
you
up in
guys.
that's how I ended up in human resources. I was
Yeah.
able to relate to people where other people couldn't.
Matthias was known for the person who, if there was an argument on the playground or wherever, he's the one that would calm them down.
Yeah,
Yeah, he could do that. Um,
referee.
Recently, a bunch of girls were going to go do something, and they said, "We want you to come along because you're the one who calms things down." I was like,
Uh-huh.
he just has that presence. Um, so, um, but getting comfortable with that is another thing entirely. That's not what's going on inside, but that's how people perceive you outside.
That's right. Yeah.
So, Matthias was always sent to the new person, and he's going, "That was always hard," and I'm going,
Hmm.
"Yeah, but the person was just delighted that this older person that knew what they were doing in that situation would talk to them and help walk them through, and it always meant so much to the new student."
Absolutely.
So um as we're going into this new part, so
How do you teach them?
gotta get my mind going in different directions. So let's talk about language. Language
Okay.
was interesting, teaching Matthias languages. And I know you learned French. How did you do that?
Well, in high school, everybody was determined that they were going to learn Spanish. Okay. Spanish was the easiest language course for some reason. And everybody said French was so hard. But I love the French language. I think it's one of the most beautiful languages spoken. And so they offered French classes in high school. So I decided I'm going to take French. And I ended up with a French teacher that had spent years in France and learn how to speak real French, not just book written French. And as we went through the semester, she would say, I had learned what little I learned from people that knew a little bit about French here and there. But she would say, if you're going to learn how to speak French, you're going to speak it right. And she would have everybody rolling their tongues and everybody talking from the back of their throat, or everybody, you had to say it right. And uh, she said, some of this of what you see here is not going to be in the book, but this is really how they speak in France. So this is what I'm going to teach you. And because of her, my interest went through the roof. And because it went through the roof, I would spend time listening to her, reading, practicing, what does this mean? How do you put this together? What gender is this? And that kind of thing because of her. That's how I got started with the French. And I've gotten away from it, but I still remember a lot of it because of her. I've always enjoyed that language. She took that time. She answered questions. If somebody, I wasn't the only one asking questions because there were a lot of them, but context. She always gave us context.
Mm.
And that was huge because not only did you know the meaning of the word, but you understood how the word fit into a conversation. So you had your context. So that's how I got into French.
And you told me that she actually said, visualize being at a cafe outside a
Yes,
French cafe. So she gave you, that's the context.
yes.
So what would you say to the waiter? What would you say? Those kind of things,
Mm-hmm.
that you had a visual to put a lot of words in.
Yes, yes. She would even say, okay, you're walking into a hotel and you're going to get your hotel room. How do you ask for your hotel room? And you'd speak, bonjour, je m'appelle Cindy, and bourgeois, and I don't remember how to say. I've registered room here, and may I please check in? And if you didn't say it right, she would make you go back and do it again until you did say it right. Repetition is the best teacher, and she might have been the one that told me that. But yeah, she would put us in all kinds of situations where, because she wanted us to learn real French, not book learned French.
I love those scenes.
Yeah, it was cool. It made it a lot easier.
Mhm. Yeah. One of the things that I ran into was I just wanted to learn Spanish because everybody else was.
Mm-hmm.
But the teacher was doing it by the book. And of course, he had to flashcards. Well, you do 30 flashcards in for a week, right? It just got too much. Even he was trying to
Yeah.
put a picture with each one of them, it's too much. If we just did a picture of the playground and then all the words on the
Oh,
playground.
yeah. Yeah, that would have made a big difference.
Oh yeah, yeah. One picture with many parts is much easier to remember than 30 different pictures. Um, when I ended up homeschooling him, um, there's a few of them, Spanish courses that do a lot of visuals with the
Mm-hmm.
sentences, and that he did one of those. His favorite course though was when we did take lessons, and he actually had a tutor that did sign language.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he had fun with that. Of course, he drew each of the hand movements, for each
Good
one.
for him. That's
Yeah, he really enjoyed that. Um,
awesome.
yeah. So, but I had to teach the teacher how to teach him,
Yeah,
type sort of thing. Um,
we need to teach the kids how to teach the teacher without insulting the teacher, if that
mhm.
makes sense.
Yes, yeah. The problem was, besides, because they're non-sequential, they don't know themselves. And there's
Right.
this under thought within the high school education system that at ninth grade, they should have enough understanding of themselves to be able to start telling the teacher how to do it. And you want the parent out of the way, and you just want to, the child should be able to kind of tell you. Mm-mm. It is a sequential process in itself to understand yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
Took
have
me
yet,
40 some odd years and I still don't understand myself.
yeah. The earliest I've heard anybody start figuring themselves out is 10th grade. 10th grade.
Mhm.
And she found out in 10th grade, um, and this is art teacher, that she needed to have pictures to learn history.
I I had found at that point 10th grade. That's algebra and history and Edgar Allan Poe,
Mhm.
pictures, huge.
Yeah.
And
See,
the more I had, the better.
yep, exactly. Matthias wouldn't have known.
Mm-mm.
I mean, he was trying to, I mean, it's not that he was afraid of the teachers. He was trying to ask questions that made sense, but they weren't always the questions that needed to be answered.
Sometimes the hardest part is asking the question the way it needs to be asked to get the answer that you're looking for because you're not sure you're asking the right question to start with. As a student, you're not sure. You're so if the teacher's throwing a problem at you and you're like, "Well, I don't understand." And the teacher tries to explain it to you again, you don't know as a sensory learner, you don't know how to tell them, explain it to me this way, you know? It's especially since if you're dealing with it at a young age, a very young age, and you don't know that's what your problem is, which you don't, trying to explain to somebody, explain it to me this way doesn't work. So what do you
Exactly.
do?
Yeah. You struggle. You
A
just
lot.
struggle. Yeah.
I always said, show me.
I don't know that he ever got there. One of the things that the English teacher really tried to do, because English teachers are high word, they're very sequential, because they're taking this bunch of words and this bunch of words and they're putting them together with a third bunch of words. Um, very difficult, very difficult when you're not sequential. Okay. So trying to understand him and the thinking in pictures and what's that about, and he wasn't asking questions. So she basically said, I'm going to give you points for asking questions. And his basic go-to was, can you explain it again? Or I don't understand. He didn't know what question to ask
Exactly.
because he didn't know how it fit together. He had no idea.
I had an English teacher that taught us, okay, what's the difference between peace and peace? Piece and Peace. What's the difference? She said, ask to have a context. This is the first time I'd ever heard the context. And I said, okay, put it in context. And she said, I have peace in my heart. That is Peace. I want a piece of pie. That is Piece. I have never forgotten that because I had the pictures.
There you go. I loved it. Oh,
I was lucky.
exactly. Yeah, pick up those pieces, nuggets along the way, those nuggets of truth. Um, yeah, I learned if I had a new concept from Matthias, I had to figure it out how to put it in picture form.
Yeah.
And then I could explain it to him. It could have the words, but it had to have the pictures with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, even explaining in junior high is like we took, I had him draw a person and draw a t-shirt on him with stripes and a baseball hat.
Okay.
Okay. And what if we then changed this guy and we put a cowboy hat on him and cowboy boots? How does that change the story? He went,
From baseball to cowboy. What'd he say?
uh, he went, well, the end of the conversation was, I get it. That's the kind of details the teachers are looking for
Yeah.
and why they are important because he didn't know why they were important. It's like it changes the story to have the details.
Hmm.
But see, he wouldn't have understood that if I hadn't taken the time to explain it to him.
Yeah. I had a teacher that was kind enough to get that to me.
Exactly.
So
Um, never. One of the things I learned is I never immediately think he knows it. I may over explain, um, but I never take it for granted that he knows something.
have you ever heard him say, okay, I get it?
Yep.
I,
And I'm
I
giving
had,
him a
I,
permission to do that more. And because I told him, this is what I do and why. And he went, oh, I get it. So now he's
I'm
going, I got it, Mom.
doing that to Greg now. It's okay. I got it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
But,
once if you're dealing with someone that's younger and uh, you're explaining something and they say, okay, I got it. Sometimes that, okay, I got it is frustration. So you need to ask them, okay, what do you have? Explain it to me. And when they can give it back to you, they got it.
I saw the look on his face. It was that like, bing.
Yeah, that makes a big difference.
So,
Sometimes it's just frustration. Just quit explaining it to me.
yeah.
I've been into that point. I don't want to hear it anymore. Just quit explaining it to me.
And at that point, you need to take a break. They need
Yeah.
to breaks to be able to kind of rethink it themselves.
Yeah. They need a chance to work through what you've been telling them. Because believe it
Exactly.
or not, in one paragraph, you can change what you're saying 10 times without even realizing you're doing it. So sometimes it takes that. Let's take a minute and think about this to clear the air and make sure it's understood the way it was meant to be understood. That's half
Exactly.
the problem, is getting it across the way it's meant to come across.
Mhm. Exactly. It took me a long time to learn Matthiasese. Yeah, but we went into a sermon, and he listened to it, and we always do a takeaway. What did you get out of the sermon? And he came out with a great takeaway, but he couldn't nail it in words. So I knew he
Mm-hmm.
didn't totally have it. And usually he comes out with the takeaways and he nails them. I mean, they're incredible takeaways of wisdom and understanding. I just amazed. But not this time. This time he just wasn't nailing it. And I said, you mean like the picture with the fish all going one way except one going the other way? And he went, yeah, that's it. you know, I nailed it for him. And then at the dinner table, I went on to explain more what that meant. And he totally got it. But he had the picture of the concept so that we could put more words to it.
I looked at that picture, I think for 2 years, and I'm like, what is so special about that picture? And I kept seeing it in a circle with two fish going in the opposite direction and everything else going in the same direction. And I kept looking at it. It's like, what in the world is so special about that picture? And somebody said, uh, what is the proper going against the uh going against the I can't think of the words. It's where you're going against what everybody else is thinking.
That's
You're
quote, I
actually
think.
going on your going on your own. And I heard somebody say that as they were looking at that picture, and I went, "Oh!" My brain suddenly clicked. I get it.
Yep, yep, yep.
Mm,
It's a great picture.
it is.
So, but learning that Matthias sees when he can't get it, pull the picture.
And look
But
for the nearest picture usually
mhm, yeah,
because that's where it starts.
yeah. One of the hardest things is helping people that do public speaking, like pastors,
Oh,
etc. Just give us a picture. Don't make it hard. Why are you making it so hard? You're talking about the Jordan River. Put a picture of the Jordan River. You know what I mean?
exactly.
It
Give
doesn't
me
have
something
to
to
be.
hold on to.
Yeah, exactly. They make it so tough. It's like, no, just make it easy.
When I speak publicly, you couldn't have gotten me in front of a ghost for the longest time because I had stage fright so bad. But I would sing in front of anybody. Well, the position I had for a while, I had to speak in front of people. I was determined at that point that what I said was going to make sense. I wanted it more than anything to make sense. And I would sit down and I would make notes and I'd stand up there going, shaking like a leaf. But I made sure that everybody understood what I was trying to say. And it got, as I did, the more I was able to speak and the more I was able to stand up in front of people and the more they got out of it, the more comfortable I got with it. Public speaking is not an easy thing uh, for a lot of people, but for me, it was horrifying at first. And I didn't want to be standing out in public. I didn't want to be on the news. I didn't want to be anything like that. All I wanted to do was go to work, do my job, and keep my head down.
I get that. Um, Matthias is a good public speaker. He honestly is. If he thinks through what he wants to say beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if he has pictures to look at. Um, However, it, because he sometimes doesn't figure out the word he wants at the right time. It's those kind of things. Or you do the question and answer thing, he doesn't know what to come back with. It's like
Uh-huh.
he's unsure of his own verbal abilities,
That
which
takes
is why he doesn't.
practice.
It takes
Yeah.
practice, which is why he doesn't like to do public speaking. But he has the presence and he has done it and he's very good at it. So it will come back. It's just process of getting comfortable with himself again.
It's also being very comfortable with
True.
the subject
That's very,
matter.
very true. Yeah,
Because if
exactly.
somebody asks you a question, are you going to be able to answer it? I had to have the ability to stand up and answer questions. And
Yeah.
so that in itself could be a challenge. So having a good knowledge of the subject matter helps.
Good thought. Good thought. Um, Using imagination. I Teachers don't always allow for that. Now, I his last history teacher understood enough to open up the door that use your imagination. I expect you to use your imagination and some of this stuff. There's a few things that I'm going to, it's more, it was tough for him to do. He could do it, but it was tough. But using his imagination of having Napoleon Bonaparte and
Mm-hmm.
Mussolini have a conversation.
There you go.
you
Yeah.
know, um, what would they talk about? Good question. But he let them use their imaginations. Make scenes in their minds and then kind of write those down. Um, what I've heard over and over again is that if they can relate to an historical character,
Mm-hmm.
emotionally and see in their head and make those scenes, they've got it.
Yep.
And it's much easier to remember than if it's just a fact on paper, or most history things don't have a full story about the person. It's like two sentences, and you're supposed to know that person at the end of the chapter and remember them for a test. It's like,
Yeah, exactly.
know this person. Why would I remember them? you know, but when you can make that scene, you feel like you know them and
Yeah.
relate to them, or at least acquainted with them. Um,
Yeah.
so that's a huge piece in history if you're trying to teach how to do it. One of the things we did that last summer is we did the Beatles life story. It was 3 hours. We didn't do it all at
Wow.
once, thankfully. Um, but it went from the 70s to the 90s, right? And how they affected culture and how culture affected their music. That back and forth. And having and he related to them,
Hmm.
and how hard, just trying to figure out life and how hard it was for them. Um, really resonated in Matthias, and that was his train of thought afterwards. But he could see
Well,
how his history flowed,
yeah. And how it changed things.
how it changed things. Yeah,
One of
huge learning happened.
one of the my favorite preachers has a saying that always catches my attention the minute he says it, because I know he's going to do some history teaching out of the Bible. Is he says, "Imagine in the theater of your mind,
Mm,
and you know a story's coming."
love it. Somebody understands.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there is at least one book that says it's a history um, curriculum that said it was a series of stories. I would have liked to have gotten it, but by then we were past that particular subject in history. Um, but I think they're finally getting how important stories are. Um, the Native Americans do stories so well, but they don't give a lot of detail. They expect their audience to fill in their details with that theater in their mind.
Yeah. The imagination.
The imagination. Yeah. Imagination is incredibly important when you're reading a story, when you're doing history. It becomes extremely important. And then you have science.
Yeah.
Science is interesting. Everybody I've ever known that are sequential learners are non-sequential learners are going, do we have to?
The one thing I
Because it's
remember about science is having to cut an eyeball open. That's the only thing I really remember much about science, because
uh,
that was horrible.
yeah. Matthias did the scientific method while he was in school. And afterwards, I could not get him to touch it. It was like, no,
Oh, bless his heart.
it just doesn't make sense to their minds. You're making connections that they don't make well or easily. And it's just hard, no matter which way you want to do it.
Well,
Um,
science is primarily theoretical, and our thinking doesn't do theory well. So
it's logic and
theoretical,
theory. Yeah.
yeah, and we don't do that well. I don't
Heather came
anyway.
up with, if she basically said, I came up with a spin rule if you're going to do flying, I was thinking helicopter, something that flew and came down. She was thinking a pinwheel, but
Yeah,
it's just like you guess, and by gosh, you know,
yeah,
it, it's a guessing game rather than using the scientific method.
yep.
They really do not think that way, and they're not going to think that way. Um,
Mm-mm.
the school had them, they did some really good things in having them work together as teams when they're trying to figure things out so that they can guess them by gosh together to kind of figure it
Yeah,
all out, right? Which made it fun, take some of the stress off of it. And at the same time, they were learning. Um, People that are creative are very good at problem solving. There's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with their ability to problem solve, but
Some of
they
the
do it,
best.
yeah, but they do it by trial and error.
Yep.
They really do. Um, so, it, like I said, school becomes very, very interesting. Let's see. Well, I think we did
School
that.
becomes very, very challenging.
Yeah. They are trying to change it, but we'll see where they go to. One of the things that you really helped me with, I think we'll need to finish with this one, is what questions do they need to ask when they are creating something?
Are you talking about me as a
Yeah, when you're
thinker?
creating,
When I'm creating something, if somebody is asking me to create something, I need a direction. It can be creating anything. They can say, I don't care what it is. It can be anything. All I'm looking for is something original, something, okay, fine. Give me a direction. Give me something that you've got something in mind, or you wouldn't be asking me this question. So give me a direction, and then I'll create something and I'll show it to you. And if this doesn't work for you, give me a direction from that point. Now I've had people that I've taken stuff to 4 or 5 times before I finally got into the direction they wanted me to go. Because, like I said, to me, I have no imagination. It's not my imagination that's the problem. My imagination is fine. The problem is figuring out what your imagination is expecting from me. Does that make
um,
sense?
oh, it does. It makes perfect sense. I was asking Ruth, I wanted an original Ruth painting. She does naturalistic paintings, and they're incredible. Um, and she basically asked that question, well, what exactly do you want? And I said, take a scripture, your favorite scripture, and make a painting out of it, such as the deer panteth for the water. And she went, oh, I love that scripture. And she went right after it. It is
Yeah.
a concept picture. So it took her a while. What does desperation look like? And
Mm-hmm.
working that through. And she's finally
Mm-hmm.
come up with a drawing that she's satisfied with. But I had to give her direction as to what I was thinking.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the other thing that really hit me is when, particularly for a teacher, when you're giving them an assignment, they're going to ask the question, um, can I go, do I have artistic license or not? Do I have to do it just the way you say it, point by point, or can I do it the way that makes sense to me and that I like?
Ask the question.
Yeah,
It's,
it's a
yeah.
very important question. It's
Yeah.
not one that he.
The artistic license part is a little technical, but asking it the way you did, do I need to follow exactly what you're looking for, or can I veer off over here? Would that be acceptable? That's the question.
Right.
You know, how much of my imagination do you want in this?
Yeah, we ran into he was writing a paper, this creative paper, and we were going out of a curriculum. So he read the things, and then he did his own spin on it. So he left. He mentioned the middle part. I mean, just passing, but it was supposed to be a whole paragraph according to the directions. So he did it creatively without asking. So I had to teach him. He didn't know that he needed to ask that question. He honestly
Right.
didn't know to ask that question. And that's one of the problems that come up with students. They don't know how to what question to ask. You have to teach them, well, if you want to do it a different way, you need to come ask me.
When my husband came out of open heart surgery, the surgeon asked me, "Do you have any questions?" Do you know what my answer to him was?
But
I have no idea what questions to ask. And that's where most people are nowadays. It's not that they don't have questions, even your kids have questions. The problem is, how do they know what questions to ask that they won't get ridiculed, that they won't get put down, that they won't get called stupid, that they won't get told, "Why don't you understand what I'm telling you?" Patience and listening. That is the hardest part. Is the children are asking, the parents are asking, the older people are asking questions. We just need to stop and listen. And then we need to ask the question back. Is this what you're asking me?
exactly. One of the best things that Matthias and I have and are learning is just take that time, when they're self-protective,
Oh,
and
yeah.
many of them are. Yeah, and many of them have gone into procrastination mode along the way because they've gotten so frustrated. Okay, that is very common.
Oh, yeah.
So, to take the time to is okay. I hear what you're saying, son. Let me give it back to you to make sure that we both know I understand, and then feed it back to him,
Yep.
and then he can say, yes, you got it, or no, you don't, and explain further if need be. And then it's my turn to talk, and then he can see if he understands what I say.
Uh-huh.
Take the time to slow down the conversation to make sure each other knows what the other one's saying.
And what expectations are. Yes.
The expectations are exactly. So what that actually looked like recently, we were talking, and I he was in that place of self-protection, and I ended up going to the place of self-protection. I caught myself really quickly, but I went there. So I went, I'm sorry, I'm being self-protective and I don't need to be here. And he caught himself, which was huge. And he went, oh, I am too. Okay. And he breathed and calmed down. And I said, what I'm doing is I'm trying to give another picture of how we perceive you.
Yep.
And he went,
Yep.
oh, I get it. But it's that calming everything down
Yep.
that makes a
The
huge
listening, the listening, and admitting that you're
yourself,
listening.
right, to yourself as well as the other person.
Yeah,
Because let's face it, they say things that they may not mean it the way you think they do, but it sure feels like they're coming against you as a parent, that you're not doing whatever it is right. And
that
that's
comes
not what it's
across
about.
as friends too. So, when sometimes the things that I say that come out of my mouth are not what I'm trying to say. Okay. So it'll come out and then I'll have to say, whoa, wait a minute. And I'll back up and I'll say, well, let me try that again. Okay. And this is as an adult. Now, can you see it as a child or as a teenager? So
Matthias said, I'm saying these words, they're coming out of my mouth, and I don't think I believe them.
uh-huh. I know that.
You know,
I
and
know that feeling really well.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah. He had taken in what some other friends done, and he was saying the same things, but then he realized, oh, that's not what I believe.
that's
He
not
had,
me.
he hadn't put the pieces together. Being non-sequential is hard.
It is.
Thank you so much, Cindy. This has
You're
been
welcome.
amazing, and I think my audience will just really eat it up.
I hope so. I hope so. It's not an easy way to go, but you know what? We do well.
Amen.